In a world often ravaged by violence and oppression, the figures of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama shine brightly as symbols of resilience, compassion, and the unyielding pursuit of peace. Their stories are not just tales of personal triumph but of collective struggle and the human condition's deepest desires: freedom, justice, and dignity. These two individuals, born into vastly different cultures and circumstances, have faced regimes that sought to silence them, yet neither turned to violence as a means of resistance. Instead, both have consistently chosen the path of non-violence, grounded in their spiritual beliefs, and have become global icons for peaceful resistance. But what does it truly mean to resist non-violently in a world that seems to reward violence with power? And how have these two leaders, despite their unique circumstances, managed to inspire millions across the globe? As we explore the intertwining stories of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama, we will delve into their shared commitment to non-violence, the spiritual philosophies that underpin their activism, and the profound personal sacrifices they have made. Along the way, we will confront difficult questions about the nature of leadership, the complexities of morality, and the tensions between political ideals and real-world governance. Join our journey toward peace and compassion. Subscribe channel now for inspiring stories of non-violent leaders like Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama, the early lives of two leaders. Before we can understand the weight of their struggles and the depth of their philosophies, we must first look at the early lives of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama. How did they come to embody such powerful movements? What early influences shaped their views on peace, justice, and non-violence? Aung San Suu Kyi was born in 1945 into a family that was already etched deeply into Myanmar's fight for independence. Her father, Aung San, was a revered national hero who had fought for the country's freedom from British colonial rule. Tragically, he was assassinated when Suu Kyi was just a child, but his legacy left an indelible mark on her. Growing up in a politically active household, Suu Kyi was exposed to ideas of governance, justice, and resistance from a young age. However, her early years were not solely defined by political struggle. Suu Kyi was also a scholar, deeply influenced by her education abroad. She studied in India and the United Kingdom, where she was exposed to a range of political philosophies and ideas that would later inform her activism. Yet, it was her return to Myanmar in 1988, at the height of political unrest, that would cement her role as a national and global leader. On the other side of the Himalayan range, the Dalai Lama's early life took a drastically different trajectory, although his future would also be shaped by political turmoil. Born as Lamo Thondup in 1935 in a small village in Tibet, he was recognized as the reincarnation of the 13th Dalai Lama at the age of 2. This recognition placed an immense spiritual and political burden on him from a very young age, marking him as the leader of the Tibetan people. However, his role as the temporal leader of Tibet would be tested to its limits when, in 1950, China invaded Tibet, forcing him to assume leadership far earlier than expected. The Dalai Lama, at the age of just 15, was thrust into a geopolitical conflict that would eventually see him flee Tibet and lead a government in exile in India. Like Aung San Suu Kyi, the Dalai Lama's early experiences with political oppression would shape his lifelong commitment to peace, dialogue, and compassion. Non-violence as a philosophy and strategy. It is one thing to face oppression and another to choose to confront it with non-violence. Both Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama have consistently chosen non-violence as their primary strategy for resistance. But what drives this commitment? Is it merely a political tactic, or does it come from a deeper, spiritual place? For both leaders, non-violence is not just a strategy but a way of life. Aung San Suu Kyi has often spoken of how her approach to resistance is deeply influenced by Mahatma Gandhi's philosophy of satyagraha, or truth force. This philosophy, which Gandhi used to lead India's struggle for independence, emphasizes the power of truth and nonviolent resistance to bring about political and social change. For Suu Kyi, nonviolence is rooted in a fundamental belief that any form of violence, even in pursuit of a just cause, corrupts the very ideals one seeks to uphold. As she once said, it is not power that corrupts, but fear. Fear of losing power corrupts those who wield it, and fear of the scourge of power corrupts those who are subject to it. For her, non-violence is the only path to true freedom, both for herself and for her people. The Dalai Lama's commitment to non-violence is similarly profound, but it is grounded even more deeply in his Buddhist beliefs. As the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, the Dalai Lama has spent his life promoting the values of compassion, kindness, and understanding. In Buddhism, the principle of ahimsa, non-harm, is central to all aspects of life. The Dalai Lama has often said that true peace can only come when individuals cultivate inner peace, which can then radiate outward to create harmony in the world. This belief is not just theoretical for him, it has guided his approach to the Tibetan conflict for decades. Even after the violent annexation of Tibet by China and the brutal suppression of Tibetan culture and religion, the Dalai Lama has consistently advocated for dialogue and negotiation rather than armed resistance. The Dalai Lama's middle way approach is a perfect example of his commitment to nonviolence. Rather than seeking full independence for Tibet, he has called for greater autonomy within China, believing that this is a more realistic and peaceful solution to the conflict. His approach has earned him both praise and criticism, praise for his dedication to peace and criticism from some Tibetan activists who believe that his approach is too conciliatory. Yet, the Dalai Lama remains steadfast in his belief that violence is never the answer. As he once said, in the practice of tolerance, one's enemy is the best teacher. The role of Buddhism in their activism, it is impossible to fully understand the philosophies of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama without delving into their shared Buddhist beliefs. Both leaders are devout Buddhists, and their spiritual practices have deeply influenced their political actions. But what is it about Buddhism that lends itself to nonviolent resistance? At its core, Buddhism teaches that suffering is an inherent part of life and that the path to ending suffering lies in cultivating wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness. These principles have been central to both Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama's activism. For Aung San Suu Kyi, Buddhism has provided her with the inner strength and resilience needed to endure her years of house arrest and political repression. She has often spoken about how meditation and mindfulness have helped her maintain a sense of inner peace, even in the face of extreme hardship. Her political philosophy is grounded in the Buddhist principles of compassion, patience, and non-attachment, which have guided her approach to leadership. Similarly, the Dalai Lama's activism is deeply rooted in Buddhist teachings. As the spiritual leader of Tibetan Buddhism, he has spent his life promoting the values of compassion, humility, and kindness. His approach to the Tibetan conflict is not just political but deeply spiritual, as he sees the resolution of the conflict as a way to alleviate the suffering of the Tibetan people. He often speaks about the importance of inner peace as a foundation for world peace, believing that only by cultivating compassion within ourselves can we hope to create a more peaceful and just society. In this sense, both Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama approach activism not just as a political struggle but as a spiritual journey. They emphasize the importance of looking inward to create change outwardly. This approach is evident in their respective movements, which focus not only on political change but also on the transformation of the human spirit. For both leaders, the path to peace and justice begins with self-awareness and inner transformation, the power and limits of nonviolent resistance. While Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama have been celebrated for their commitment to nonviolence, their approaches have also faced significant challenges. Nonviolent resistance, while morally compelling, is not always easy, and it often requires immense personal sacrifice. Both leaders have endured decades of struggle, and their movements have faced setbacks, sometimes raising questions about the effectiveness of nonviolent methods. For Aung San Suu Kyi, the challenge of nonviolent resistance was perhaps most evident during her years of house arrest. Confined to her home by the military junta, Suu Kyi could not directly engage with her supporters, and her influence was largely symbolic. Yet, despite the isolation and the military's brutal repression of her followers, she refused to endorse armed resistance. Many have wondered whether her refusal to embrace violence slowed Myanmar's transition to democracy. Would the country have achieved freedom more quickly if Suu Kyi had taken a different approach? These are difficult questions with no easy answers. Yet, Suu Kyi's commitment to non-violence remained unshaken, even in the face of such criticism. The Dalai Lama has faced similar challenges in his efforts to promote non-violence. Tibet remains under Chinese control, and the Chinese government continues to suppress Tibetan culture, religion, and identity. While the Dalai Lama's message of peace and dialogue has earned him international respect, it has not led to tangible political change for the Tibetan people. Some critics argue that his middle way approach has not done enough to pressure China into granting greater autonomy for Tibet, and some younger Tibetan activists have called for a more aggressive approach. Yet, like Suu Kyi, the Dalai Lama remains steadfast in his belief that violence is not the answer. His commitment to non-violence is a reflection of his deep spiritual beliefs. And he continues to advocate for peaceful dialogue, even in the face of immense frustration. The role of personal sacrifice, the weight of leadership, what does it mean to carry the burden of an entire people's hopes and dreams? For both Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama, their lives have been marked by immense personal sacrifices. Neither sought out the paths that led them to global prominence, yet both accepted their roles with grace, shouldering the immense responsibilities placed upon them. In their struggles for freedom and human rights, they have faced not only external threats from oppressive regimes but also internal struggles as leaders who must continually remain beacons of hope and moral strength. Can we even imagine what that must feel like? Aung San Suu Kyi's house arrest, which lasted almost 15 years, represents one of the most visible forms of personal sacrifice in her journey. Isolated from her family, her husband, Michael Eris, and her 2 children, she was cut off from the world in every meaningful sense, but she never wavered in her commitment to her cause. One cannot help but wonder, what sustained her during these long years of isolation? She has often spoken about how her Buddhist practice helped her maintain her resolve, suggesting that her political struggle was as much about inner discipline as it was about external circumstances. Imagine living under such constant scrutiny, with little to no freedom to communicate with the outside world. Many of us struggle with far less, yet she maintained an unbreakable spirit. Her life is a testament to the idea that leadership sometimes requires the ultimate sacrifice. Family, freedom, personal desires, all must be set aside for the greater good. Her decision to stay in Myanmar, even when her husband was dying of cancer in England, was one of the most poignant examples of this. Suu Kyi made the heart-wrenching choice not to leave her country because she knew the military would never allow her to return if she left. In an almost unimaginable act of personal sacrifice, she prioritized the freedom of her nation over her own family, knowing full well that she might never see her husband again. How many of us could make such a decision? The Dalai Lama's sacrifices are of a different nature, but no less profound. Forced into exile at the age of 23, he has spent the majority of his life as a stateless person, separated from the land and people he was destined to lead. Tibet, under Chinese rule, has faced the erosion of its culture, language, and religion, and yet the Dalai Lama remains a symbol of Tibetan identity and resilience. His government in exile, based in Dharamshala, India, has worked tirelessly to preserve Tibetan culture, but the fact remains that the Dalai Lama's homeland is still under occupation, and millions of Tibetans live in diaspora. One can only imagine the pain of being exiled from one's homeland, watching from afar as the very essence of one's culture is being systematically destroyed. Yet, despite these immense personal losses, both leaders have remained steadfast in their commitment to their people. There is a lesson here that goes beyond politics and into the realm of philosophy. The willingness to sacrifice one's personal happiness for the greater good is a form of leadership that transcends the ordinary. It asks profound questions about the nature of selflessness and the responsibilities we bear toward others. In a world where individualism often takes precedence, Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama remind us that sometimes true leadership requires the ultimate act of letting go of one's personal desires, comfort, and even family, for the sake of a greater cause. The philosophical underpinnings of their struggles, at the heart of the connection between Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama, is not just their shared commitment to nonviolence, but the deep philosophical underpinnings that guide their actions. Both leaders are shaped by Buddhist thought, though they come from different traditions within Buddhism, Suu Kyi from the Theravada tradition of Myanmar, and the Dalai Lama from the Mahayana tradition of Tibetan Buddhism. However, despite these differences, both traditions emphasize the central tenets of Karu, compassion, and Prajna, wisdom, which have become guiding principles for both leaders. What is it about Buddhism that lends itself to nonviolent resistance? One of the core teachings of Buddhism is the recognition of dukkha, or suffering, as an inherent part of life. However, Buddhism also teaches that this suffering is not permanent, and through the cultivation of wisdom, compassion, and mindfulness, individuals can overcome it. Both Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama have embodied this principle in their struggles, choosing not to be defined by the suffering they have endured, but instead using it as a means to grow spiritually and to inspire others. For Aung San Suu Kyi, Buddhism has always been a source of strength. In interviews, she has often reflected on how her meditation practice helped her maintain inner peace during her years of house arrest. It was during these long periods of isolation that she turned inward, using the principles of mindfulness to stay focused on her goals. Her belief in anicca, impermanence, allowed her to understand that her suffering, like all things, was temporary. It was this sense of impermanence that enabled her to remain calm and resilient, knowing that, in time, the political situation in Myanmar would change. The Dalai Lama's spiritual practice is equally central to his activism. As a monk, he has dedicated his life to the principles of compassion and non-attachment. In his teachings, the Dalai Lama often speaks of the importance of inner peace as a foundation for outer peace. He believes that true peace in the world can only be achieved when individuals cultivate peace within themselves. This philosophy is evident in his approach to the Tibetan struggle. Rather than focusing on the external conflict between Tibet and China, the Dalai Lama emphasizes the importance of maintaining inner peace and compassion, even toward those who oppress his people. In both cases, the Buddhist principle of Karu, compassion, takes center stage. For Suu Kyi, her compassion is directed toward the people of Myanmar, who have suffered under decades of military dictatorship. Her political philosophy, grounded in Buddhist teachings, emphasizes the importance of patience and non-attachment, recognizing that the path to democracy is a long one and that true change can only come through nonviolent means. Similarly, the Dalai Lama's compassion extends not only to the Tibetan people but also to the Chinese government, which he sees as misguided rather than inherently evil. His belief in the interconnectedness of all beings leads him to advocate for a peaceful resolution to the Tibetan conflict, one that recognizes the humanity of both Tibetans and Chinese. This shared commitment to compassion and nonviolence is what sets both leaders apart in a world that often views violence as a necessary means to achieve political ends. It also raises profound questions about the nature of power and leadership. In a world dominated by violent conflict and revolution, can nonviolence truly bring about lasting change? Both Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama would argue that it can, but they also acknowledge that the path is not easy. It requires immense personal discipline, spiritual practice, and the ability to remain patient in the face of overwhelming obstacles. Global impact and legacy. Nobel Peace Prize as a symbol. The international recognition of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama's efforts came in the form of the Nobel Peace Prize, which both leaders received for their commitment to peace, nonviolence, and human rights. For Suu Kyi, the Nobel Prize was awarded in 1991 during her years of house arrest, symbolizing the world's acknowledgement of her sacrifice and her struggle for democracy in Myanmar. The Dalai Lama received the Nobel Prize 2 years earlier, in 1989, for his efforts to promote peaceful solutions to the Tibetan conflict and for his work as a global advocate for peace and human rights. The Nobel Peace Prize represents more than just an accolade. It is a symbol of hope, a recognition that in a world so often dominated by violence, there are still individuals who believe in the power of peace. For Aung San Suu Kyi, the Nobel Prize provided her with a global platform from which she could continue her advocacy, even while confined within the walls of her home. It was a reminder that the world had not forgotten her, and that her struggle for democracy was part of a larger global movement for peace and human rights. The Dalai Lama's Nobel Prize similarly elevated his status as a global ambassador for peace. It solidified his position not just as a political leader for Tibet but as a spiritual leader for the world. The Nobel Prize also brought increased attention to the plight of the Tibetan people, who, despite decades of repression, continue to struggle for cultural preservation and autonomy. However, both leaders have also faced challenges in maintaining their global reputations. In recent years, Aung San Suu Kyi's handling of the Rohingya crisis has sparked international controversy, leading some to question whether she still deserves her place as a symbol of human rights. The military's brutal crackdown on the Rohingya Muslim minority, which led to widespread displacement and accusations of ethnic cleansing, has tarnished Suu Kyi's once unblemished reputation as a champion of peace. Her perceived silence and inaction during this crisis have raised difficult questions about the nature of leadership, morality, and the challenges of governing in a complex political landscape. Does this tarnish her legacy? Some believe it does, while others argue that her early work in promoting democracy and human rights remains a powerful testament to the strength of nonviolent resistance. In contrast, the Dalai Lama has largely maintained his standing as a moral authority and global advocate for peace. While the Tibetan issue remains unresolved, and China's influence on the world stage continues to grow, the Dalai Lama's message of compassion and nonviolence resonates across borders. His teachings on mindfulness, compassion, and inner peace have found new relevance in a world increasingly grappling with mental health crises, political polarization, and environmental challenges. The evolving nature of their leadership, as with all long-term leaders, both Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama have had to evolve their leadership styles over time, responding to changing political and social landscapes. For Suu Kyi, this evolution has been most evident in her transition from political dissident to state leader. After decades of struggle, she became the de facto leader of Myanmar in 2016, but her time in power has been marked by controversy and criticism, particularly regarding the Rohingya crisis. How does a leader who has spent most of her life advocating for peace and democracy reconcile the demands of governance with the realities of power? For the Dalai Lama, the evolution of his leadership has been less about politics and more about expanding his role as a global spiritual figure. As he ages, the Dalai Lama has begun to focus more on global issues such as climate change, interfaith dialogue, and the promotion of secular ethics. He has also taken steps to democratize the Tibetan government in exile, reducing his own political role and encouraging younger Tibetans to take on leadership positions. In doing so, the Dalai Lama has ensured that his legacy will continue long after he is gone, not just as the leader of the Tibetan people but as a global advocate for peace, compassion, and human rights. Challenges of governance and the burden of leadership. Aung San Suu Kyi's political dilemma. Leadership, especially when grounded in moral principles such as nonviolence and compassion, is fraught with complexities. Aung San Suu Kyi's journey from revered dissident to state leader brings into sharp focus the often painful realities of governance. The political landscape is not always conducive to maintaining one's moral ideals, and Suu Kyi's experience as Myanmar's de facto leader illustrates how difficult it is to reconcile idealism with the harsh demands of political power. How do you maintain your integrity when thrust into the arena of realpolitik, where decisions often involve choosing the lesser of two evils? For Aung San Suu Kyi, this question has become central to understanding her legacy in the wake of the Rohingya crisis. While she was celebrated globally for her role in Myanmar's transition to democracy, her perceived silence and inaction regarding the military's treatment of the Rohingya population left many of her supporters disillusioned. To understand the dilemma Suu Kyi faced, we must recognize the fragile political environment in which she was operating. The military, which had held power in Myanmar for decades, still retained significant control, even after Suu Kyi's National League for Democracy, NLD, won the 2015 election. Although she held the title of state councillor, the military controlled key ministries, including defense and border affairs, and maintained significant influence over the country's political and security apparatus. In this context, Suu Kyi's ability to act was severely constrained. How could she push for justice for the Rohingya while maintaining the delicate balance of power that allowed her to continue leading the country? Would a more forceful stance against the military's actions have risked plunging Myanmar back into dictatorship? This tension between moral leadership and political pragmatism is at the heart of the criticism Suu Kyi has faced. On one hand, her early commitment to nonviolence and human rights earned her the Nobel Peace Prize and international admiration. On the other hand, her inability, or unwillingness, to publicly condemn the military's actions during the Rohingya crisis has raised questions about her moral authority. How do we reconcile these two aspects of her leadership? Can we continue to celebrate her earlier achievements in the face of such significant failings later in her career? Perhaps the most painful aspect of Suu Kyi's situation is that, for much of her career, she embodied the very ideals she seemed to abandon during her time in power. Her speeches, writings, and public appearances often emphasized the importance of compassion, patience, and non-attachment, key principles of her Buddhist faith. Yet, as the Rohingya crisis unfolded, these ideals appeared to fall by the wayside, leaving many to wonder whether the pressures of governance had forced her to compromise on her deepest beliefs. This leads us to a larger, more philosophical question: can true leadership exist without compromise? Is it possible to maintain one's moral integrity in the face of immense political pressures, or is compromise an inevitable part of governing? For Aung San Suu Kyi, these questions remain unresolved, and they continue to shape the ongoing debate about her legacy. The Dalai Lama's quiet revolution, secular ethics and global responsibility. In contrast to Aung San Suu Kyi's fraught political journey, the Dalai Lama has taken a different path, one that emphasizes spiritual leadership over political power. Yet, his influence on the global stage has been no less significant. As the Tibetan issue remains unresolved, the Dalai Lama has increasingly shifted his focus toward promoting secular ethics, global responsibility, and interfaith dialogue. What does it mean to be a leader in a world that is increasingly divided along political, religious, and cultural lines? For the Dalai Lama, the answer lies in promoting values that transcend these divisions. In his view, the world's most pressing problems, whether they are related to conflict, environmental degradation, or social injustice, cannot be solved solely through political or religious means. Instead, they require a deeper commitment to universal values such as compassion, kindness, and understanding. The Dalai Lama's concept of secular ethics is central to his vision for a more peaceful world. By secular ethics, he does not mean the rejection of religion, but rather the promotion of ethical principles that can be embraced by people of all faiths, or none. He believes that compassion and empathy are not just religious values but human values, and that by cultivating these qualities within ourselves, we can create a more harmonious world. In his teachings, the Dalai Lama often speaks of the importance of emotional intelligence, self-discipline, and mindfulness. He emphasizes that real change must begin with the individual. How can we expect to create peace in the world if we are at war with ourselves? How can we demand justice if we are consumed by anger and hatred? These questions are at the heart of his philosophy, which insists that outer peace must be grounded in inner peace. Interestingly, the Dalai Lama's shift toward promoting secular ethics has coincided with his decision to step back from political leadership. In 2011, he formally relinquished his role as the political leader of the Tibetan government in exile, transferring authority to a democratically elected leader. This decision reflects his long-held belief that the Tibetan people must take responsibility for their own future, and that leadership should not be concentrated in a single individual. By stepping away from political leadership, the Dalai Lama has been able to focus more fully on his role as a spiritual and ethical guide, not just for Tibetans but for people around the world. His message of universal responsibility, that we are all interconnected and must take responsibility for each other's well-being, resonates across cultures and borders. It is a message that challenges us to look beyond our own individual concerns and to consider the collective good, but the Dalai Lama's leadership is not without its challenges. Despite his global influence, the Tibetan issue remains unresolved. Tibet remains under Chinese control, and the Chinese government has shown little willingness to engage in meaningful dialogue about Tibetan autonomy. The Dalai Lama's middle way approach, which advocates for greater autonomy for Tibet within China rather than full independence, has not yielded tangible results. Some Tibetan activists, particularly younger generations, have expressed frustration with this approach, arguing that it is too conciliatory and that more aggressive tactics are needed to achieve freedom for Tibet. In response to these criticisms, the Dalai Lama remains resolute in his commitment to nonviolence and dialogue. He has often said that the struggle for Tibetan freedom is not just a political issue but a spiritual one, and that the only way to achieve lasting peace is through mutual understanding and compassion. For him, the Tibetan struggle is not just about gaining political autonomy but about preserving a way of life based on compassion, mindfulness, and nonviolence. This raises an important philosophical question: can moral leadership succeed in a world that often rewards aggression and power? The Dalai Lama's life suggests that while nonviolent leadership may not always achieve immediate political results, its true impact lies in its ability to inspire and transform individuals and communities. His teachings have touched millions of lives, and his vision of a more compassionate world continues to inspire people across the globe. The role of spirituality in leadership, a source of strength and clarity. One of the most striking aspects of both Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama's leadership is the role that spirituality plays in guiding their actions. While many political leaders rely on ideology or pragmatism to navigate the challenges of leadership, Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama draw deeply on their spiritual beliefs to inform their decisions and sustain them through difficult times. What can we learn from this integration of spirituality and leadership? For Aung San Suu Kyi, her Buddhist faith has been a constant source of strength throughout her political career. Her commitment to nonviolence, patience, and compassion is deeply rooted in Buddhist teachings. In her speeches and writings, she often refers to the importance of mindfulness and meditation in helping her maintain clarity and resolve in the face of adversity. Her practice of vipassana, insight meditation, has allowed her to cultivate a sense of detachment from the external world, enabling her to remain calm and focused even during the most challenging periods of her life. Suu Kyi's spiritual practice is not just a personal discipline but a guiding philosophy for her leadership. She has often spoken about the importance of cultivating inner peace in order to create outer peace. In this sense, her leadership is deeply reflective and introspective, grounded in the belief that political change must be accompanied by spiritual transformation. She believes that true freedom comes not only from political independence but from the liberation of the mind and heart from fear, anger, and attachment. Similarly, the Dalai Lama's leadership is profoundly shaped by his spiritual beliefs. As the leader of Tibetan Buddhism, he is both a political figure and a spiritual guide, and his teachings on compassion, non-attachment, and mindfulness have influenced his approach to leadership. The Dalai Lama often speaks about the importance of developing emotional resilience through spiritual practice. He teaches that by cultivating compassion and wisdom, we can overcome anger, fear, and hatred, which are the root causes of conflict and suffering. For both Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama, spirituality is not an abstract concept but a practical tool for navigating the complexities of leadership. Their spiritual practices provide them with the emotional and mental clarity needed to make difficult decisions, and their commitment to nonviolence is rooted in a deep belief in the power of compassion and mindfulness. In a world where leadership is often associated with power, control, and aggression, Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama offer a different model, one that emphasizes inner strength, humility, and empathy, the enduring legacy of nonviolent resistance. As we reflect on the lives and legacies of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama, one thing becomes clear: their commitment to nonviolence has left an indelible mark on the global struggle for peace and human rights. Both leaders have faced immense challenges, but they have remained steadfast in their belief that violence is never the answer. Their legacies, though shaped by different political contexts, converge in their shared belief that true change must be rooted in compassion, patience, and moral integrity. The impact of their nonviolent resistance extends far beyond Myanmar and Tibet. Both Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama have become symbols of peaceful resistance, inspiring movements for human rights and democracy around the world. Their leadership challenges us to reconsider our assumptions about power, conflict, and the nature of change. In a world that often rewards aggression and force, they remind us that real strength comes from the ability to remain compassionate, even in the face of injustice. Yet, their stories also remind us that nonviolent resistance is not without its challenges. Both leaders have faced criticism and setbacks, and the political situations in Myanmar and Tibet remain unresolved. This raises important questions about the limits of nonviolent resistance. Can it truly bring about political change in a world dominated by power and violence? Or is its greatest strength not in achieving immediate political results, but in inspiring a deeper transformation of the human spirit? For Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama, the answer lies in the belief that peace is not just an end goal but a way of life. Their commitment to nonviolence is not a means to an end but a reflection of their deepest values. In this sense, their legacies are not defined solely by the political outcomes of their struggles but by the moral and spiritual principles they embody. As we look to the future, the question remains: how can we, in our own lives, take up the mantle of nonviolent resistance? How can we cultivate the inner strength, compassion, and patience that Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama have demonstrated throughout their lives? Their stories challenge us to become agents of peace in our own communities, to stand up against injustice with courage and humility, and to believe that, even in the face of overwhelming odds, nonviolence is the most powerful force for change. Conclusion: the lasting impact of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama. As we reflect on the remarkable lives and leadership of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama, one thing becomes abundantly clear: their legacies transcend the specific political struggles they have fought. They are not just leaders of Myanmar and Tibet, they are global symbols of the human spirit's unyielding desire for freedom, peace, and justice. Their commitment to nonviolence, grounded in deeply held spiritual beliefs, offers a powerful reminder that true strength lies not in the ability to wield power over others but in the capacity to remain compassionate, resilient, and hopeful, even in the face of great adversity. Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama have lived lives of immense personal sacrifice, willingly taking on the weight of their people's struggles. Their shared commitment to nonviolent resistance, despite facing overwhelming repression, challenges us to rethink how we perceive power and leadership. It raises profound philosophical questions about the nature of moral authority, the tensions between idealism and political pragmatism, and the personal costs that come with standing up for justice. Suu Kyi's journey from revered dissident to embattled leader reveals the complexities of governance and the challenges of maintaining one's moral compass when faced with the harsh realities of political power. While her role in the Rohingya crisis has sparked significant controversy, her early years of struggle and her unwavering dedication to democracy and human rights remain a powerful testament to the strength of nonviolent resistance. On the other hand, the Dalai Lama's lifelong commitment to peace and compassion continues to inspire millions around the world. His promotion of secular ethics and universal responsibility transcends the political conflict in Tibet and speaks to a broader vision of global peace and harmony. His teachings remind us that, while political solutions may be elusive, the cultivation of inner peace is essential for creating a more just and compassionate world. Ultimately, the legacies of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama are not defined solely by their political victories or losses, but by the moral and spiritual principles they have embodied throughout their lives. Their refusal to resort to violence, even in the face of extreme repression, has made them icons of peaceful resistance and symbols of hope for those fighting for justice around the world. As we move forward in a world that continues to be plagued by conflict, injustice, and suffering, their stories serve as a reminder that the path to peace is not an easy one, but it is the only path worth walking. It is a path that requires immense courage, patience, and a deep commitment to the well-being of others. Their lives challenge us to become agents of peace in our own right, to cultivate compassion and understanding in our daily interactions, and to believe in the transformative power of nonviolence, even in the face of overwhelming odds. In the end, the true legacy of Aung San Suu Kyi and the Dalai Lama lies not just in the changes they have sought in their respective countries, but in the hearts and minds they have inspired across the globe. They remind us that the struggle for freedom, justice, and human dignity is not just a political battle but a deeply personal and spiritual journey. And in this journey, the most powerful weapon we have is not violence, but love, compassion, and the unwavering belief that a better world is possible.